Good morning, Ovidalcy Middle School students. This is Mr. Woolley again, and we are going to be working on Lesson 6 today in IXL. And it's not IXL, your Eureka Math. And it's the distance between two rational numbers. Now, the distance between things is always going to be a positive answer. So that's something you always want to kind of think about today. What's the distance between a -4 and a 5? Well, as you can see, the number line is 9 units. Well, if I go the other way, what's the distance between 5 and -4? It's 9 units. And we can kind of see this pattern throughout. Between a -5 and -3, it's 2 units. And between a -3 and -5, it's 2 units. Between a 7 and a 1, it's 8 units. And between a -1 and a 7 is 8 units again. All right? What's the distance between 0 and 8? 8 units. The distance between a -2 and -1.5. Well, -1.5 is between a -1 and -2 right here. It's only half of a unit. What's the distance between a -6 and a -10? That would be 4 units. So it's pretty easy to show that on a number line. All right. So find the distance between a -3 and a -2. -3 and -2, it's 5 units. Now, what we're going to use to kind of show this is an absolute value bracket. We talked about absolute values back a long time ago. Absolute values are the straight brackets around a problem. And that forces whatever ends up being inside there after you solve the problem inside, it forces it to become a positive answer. So if I have something like trying to find the difference between a -3 and a 2, -3 minus 2. And I turn that into adding the opposite, -3 plus -2, it's -5. But since I have those absolute value brackets around it, it forces this answer to be positive, so it's just a 5. What if I did the other way? What if I went from a 2 to a -3? A 2 minus a -3, well, change it to adding the opposite. 2 plus 3 is 5, and the absolute value of 5, of course, is 5. So both of them are a distance of 5 units. So if we're ever asking for a distance, you're going to think about like an absolute value scenario where it's forced to be a positive answer. So for any two rational numbers, P and Q, there's any two random numbers you want to come up with, the distance between them is the absolute value of the subtraction between those 2 points. So absolute value is those straight lines, and it forces whatever's in there to become a positive answer in the end. All right, let's take a look at some word problems with this. Distance is positive. One of the things I talked about at the start today. Change in elevation or temperature may be positive or negative depending on whether it's increasing or decreasing, going up or down. So here in A, we have a hiker starts hiking at the beginning of a trail, which is 200 feet below sea level. He hikes to a location that's 580 feet above sea level and stops for lunch. It's the vertical distance between 200 feet below sea level and 580 feet above sea level. Now, it doesn't really matter. I did it both ways, whether you want to start at the bottom or start at the top. I put the absolute value brackets around it. So this is going to be a distance, so I know it's going to be a positive answer. Again, either example you want to follow here, I turn it into adding the opposite. And by the time I either add the two negatives together or add the positives together, you either get -780 or a positive 780, but the absolute value brackets force it to be positive, so it's a distance of 780 feet. So that hiker's elevation changed 780 feet while hiking. Now here in our picture, it says after lunch, the hiker hiked back down the trail from the point of elevation, which is 580 feet above sea level, to the beginning of the trail, which is 200 feet below sea level. So on the number line here, it's a vertical number line we got in there. I got the -200 here, went with 580. Well, before lunch, there was an increase of 780 feet. And after lunch, went back down, it's a decrease of 780 feet. So what's that vertical distance between 580 feet above sea level and 200 feet below sea level? That is 780 feet. And the change in elevation, of course, doesn't matter which way you go, you're still changing your elevation 780 feet. It does help to have a word to describe it, like you've increased 780 feet or you've decreased 780 feet. All right, here's just a random example here that you can pick any choice of numbers. I just picked a 6 and a 6.5 here. It says the distance between a negative number and a positive number is 12.5. What are the numbers? So like I said, I just picked the -6 because that's a distance of 6. And from 0 to 6.5 is 6.5. If you add those two distances together, you get 12.5. Now you could have had a lot of different possibilities here, but those are just the two that I picked. All right, use the distance formula to find each answer. They want us to find the distance between a -7 and a -4. So I put the absolute value brackets around it, force me to become positive, and subtract my two values. -7 minus -4 turns into adding the opposite. -7 plus 4, well, there's more negatives than positives, so I know it's going to be a negative answer, and that's -3. All right, because 7 minus 4 is 3. And then absolute value brackets force me to become positive. Distance of 3, and you can see I did that on a small number line also. Find the change in temperature if the temperature rises from a -18 degrees to 15 degrees. Well, so I can subtract, stick my absolute value brackets around there, and becomes adding the opposite. -18 plus -15 gives me a -33, but absolute value forces me to become positive, so it's 33 degrees. And from the picture, you can see that there's 18 that are below 0, 15 that are above 0. Grand total, if you add those together, you get an increase of 33 degrees. Would your answer for part B be different if the temperature dropped from 15 to -18? Well, yes, you could describe it as a decrease in temperature, but it's still a difference of 33 degrees. That maybe just depends on how the wording would change, but the number itself will be the same. D. Beryl is the first person to finish a 5K race and is standing 15 feet beyond the finish line. Another runner, Jeremy, is currently trying to finish the race and has approximately 14 feet before he reaches the finish line. What's the minimum possible distance between Beryl and Jeremy? Well, I'm going to make the 0 of my number line my finish line. And Beryl, he's already 15 feet past that. Jeremy is 14 feet away, so he has not got to the finish line yet. So if I subtract those distances, 15 minus the -14, trying to add the opposite, so it becomes 15 plus 14, and then since absolute value brackets around it, the 29 is forced to be a positive no matter what anyways, so it's 29 feet between those two runners. What's the change in elevation from 140 feet above sea level to 40 feet below sea level? Well, subtract my numbers. 140 minus a -40. I turn that to adding the opposite. 140 plus 40, which is 180. The absolute value of 180 is just 180. Now, I could describe that as a decrease of 180 feet of elevation, because remember, I am up here. From here to here is 140 feet. From here to here is another 40 feet. So that's a grand total of 180 feet going down. Now remember, one of the biggest things here, if they're talking about like distance in a problem, is distance is always positive. You can use words to describe if something's going up or down. Now I just went through a couple of the examples here. I'm not going to go through all of them. You'll have some examples to try in Schoology in a little bit. But if I'm trying to find this difference, I turn it into adding the opposite. -19 plus a -12, -31. Since those absolute value brackets around it, it's just a 31. And if they went the other direction with it too, 19 minus -12, I still have adding the opposite, becomes 19 plus 12, gives you 31. Absolute value brackets forces it to be positive. Same kind of scenario here, 10 plus 43. When I turn it to adding the opposite, and I get 53. Absolute value of 53 is just 53. And then -10 plus, when I add the opposite, -43. Now it's all -53. But since the absolute value brackets are on it, it forces it to be a positive 53. So anyways, there's some practice problems in Schoology that'll be a homework for you, so go ahead and give those a try. Thank you.